And I want to make just one comment about how to defeat jihad, which is that I'm all in favor of, good press and good governments and good broadcasting and all of that. But at the end of the day, the most effective way to destroy jihad and the concept of jihad and the idea of jihad and the appeal of jihad is to kill them. Because that, more than anything else, it's crazy. It really makes messianic movements historically. I'm an historian of mass movements. Messianic movements very rarely survive defeat in battle. And that is because they present themselves as chosen by the Almighty and provided with supernatural powers which enable them to win. And that indeed for many centuries, Islam, as every other triumphant conquering religion, said we're winning because Allah has enabled us to win. So that when they then started losing, they said, well, why are we losing? Well, Allah has turned against us, and they said that. And why has he turned against us? Because we have strayed from the one true path, and if we go back to the one, and that's why these people are called, why Osama, etc., called fundamentalists, because they said, as Luther said in the case of Christianity and during a similar crisis, if we return to the fundamentals, Allah will favor us and so forth. And they think they are now today riding a wave of success because God is on their side, and so if they fail in battle, that is the most convincing message to the entire Islamic world that they have indeed been thoroughly and completely abandoned, because they have indeed thoroughly and completely strayed from the proper path. And under those circumstances, our work of dialogue and conversation and secularism and toleration will become infinitely easier. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My name is John Stembridge from Miami, Florida. Waleed and I have worked together many, many years in this area. And given consideration to this topic, I came up with a Global Bill of Rights with a purpose of, first of all, trying to bring three primary groups together: Jews, Christians, and Muslims. These three all call Abraham their father. And as a result, I was able to dialogue with Gus Dewar, you mentioned Indonesia, who is head of the NU Muslim organization, which today is over 42 million members. We were going to do a trilogy, Waleed, as we had at Florida International University in North Miami, 1996. Gus was going to visit me in Miami. We were going to bring dialogues together between Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Jakarta. And the then Prime Minister, Suharto, would not allow him to hold such a meeting. That's number one.
I'm sorry, do you have a question?
The question is this, that we've all heard that the pen is mightier than the sword. What is the difficulty of these three groups coming together? I dialogued with two of the top Ayatollahs of Iran in 2000, and yet there doesn't seem to be the major breakthrough of dialogue between these three major groups. Why is that?
Because there's one of the three that wants to kill and dominate the other two, and that's why. They're not interested in dialogue. They're interested in winning. There's a war. We're at war. I mean, how can you ask a question like that after all these years when they've been running around killing us? That's what they want. They don't want dialogue. They don't want, I mean, they do want peace, but they want a peace that they're able to impose. Excuse me, I didn't mean to jump in, but I was stimulated.
May I just
Please.
say that I disagree that we should just, of course, terrorists, you should target terrorists and kill them because they're trying to kill you. But I think this is not enough because they're reproducing at a fast rate because the political environment that started the whole phenomena is getting more in their favor. They thrive on becoming victims. And the biggest danger is that instead of them being isolated within the Muslim community as deviants, criminal deviants, if the West starts dealing with the rest, with 1.2 billion Muslims as deviants, then we're going to have a much bigger problem than we have today. So we have to be careful. We have to do the right thing in the West, where we have to support the democratic reformers. You know, there used to be a time when it was romantic to support the dissidents and reformers in the Soviet Union. There was this, you know, appetite for it. Now it seems that people got bored of this idea of, you know, liberating people. And you know, the funny thing is that it always used to be the Democrats who supported freedom and human rights in the world. And now when the Republicans are doing it, they're condemning them because they say that you're trying to build an empire. Well, get this, America is an empire. It's a fact that America is an empire, whether it's declared or not. The question is it doing good? And in my view, that the way the whole episode of terrorism has been handled has had some successes and some failures. The failures are on the political level rather than on the operational level in terms of pursuing these groups. It's not enough to just target the groups militarily. It is important also to expose them politically, show their bankruptcy, and show that they have nothing to promise the people. Otherwise, it will not work.
Quickly, I know we have a long line of participants, but this is an important point. And as I describe it in a couple of my books, basically when asked by the US government, other governments, international organizations, how do you confront the jihadists, especially the jihadist suicide bomber at the end of the line? 90% of the effort in the US and an American deployment overseas and also among our allies and democracies and even less democracies happens in the last 10%. We are confronting the jihadists in terms of finding them, bringing them to justice, cutting down their funding. All of that, which is huge, is basically at the last 10% of the process that produces a jihadist. Osama bin Laden said in the fall of 2001, as long as I and my organization himself can keep connecting with the pool of children and young people aged 9 to 14, I am winning this war, which translates into this. We are fighting the product of the pools. We are fighting with the jihadists, but the jihadists are coming from a pool. Now, the factories that are producing into this pool are protected, are not being attacked, are not being dealt with. The factories meaning not just the religious madrasa, the whole system that produces the jihadists, which basically is education and then indoctrination and then recruitment. Once we have a system worldwide that would go against these, then we will begin perhaps winning the war of ideas, leading into winning the war on terror. But guess what? The jihadist systems have been able to shield the factory. We cannot attack the factory. Our laws can attack it. Our courtrooms cannot attack it in America and in Europe and, of course, in the Middle East. So it is really up to a guerrilla warfare, which is Muslim dissidents, intellectual, democracy movements behind enemy lines, that will be the ones to do it, to attack the factories. And, of course, to liberate our minds here in the West. If we don't see the enemy, if we don't see the jihadist production, if we don't know who, at the end of the day, is producing them here in America and in Europe, then we are going to be fighting with the tail, not with the head. That would be my position on this.
May I suggest that may I suggest that we let all the questions be asked and
Right.
be answered all at once?
Well, let's do it this way. Let's take, how many of you are there? Six? Six. Okay, so let me try to take two at a time. Let's see how that goes up. Okay? Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate the panel. My name is Dariush Khairkha, and shortly I say I am a victim of Islam. I escaped from my country, and I'm glad I am in a free country like United States. I would like to bring to your attention, last century was the threat was communism for West and for this civilization. But this century is Islam is going to be a troublemaker. And as we know, in human history, the best system has been ever practiced is democracy, and U.S. has the best democracy ever happened to the human. But at the same time, enemy are taking the advantage of this democracy and coming inside this democracy and trying to destroy that. But my question is from Mr. Nemat. You mentioned about the Islam has never been in a terrorism and about 30 years a start. No, sir. Islam established with the terror. The leader of Islam, Muhammad, terrored the Jews and the Christian. If you research in history and put aside the prejudice, you will find out this. Three of the Caliphate, Islam, the first Caliph and third Caliph and fourth Caliph was terrored. And from beginning 1400th century up to 1918, which British destroyed the Ottoman Empire. 144 dynasty came and they were killing each other. And that's not true. It started in 30 years. Islam has this potential, always killing. The Quran, the book of the Muslim, is a manifest of the fear and kills. If you want it, I bring the statements and let you know.
No, it's okay. We got it.
Yeah.
We got it.
But the question is, in the future, what you think, this generation, this civilization, to do to stop the third world, which I believe is going to be between Muslims and Christians.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, I forget which one of you said it, that the big difference between Sunni and Shia Islam was that up until 79, Shiites would normally reject clerical rule. So my question is, what impact would the fall of the mullahs in Iran have, not just on Shia Islam, but for the separation of mosque and state within the Sunni Arab states, particularly Egypt and Saudi Arabia?
Good. Okay. Guys, so we have two questions. One is the world war of the 21st century between Islam and the rest of us? And secondly, what would be the effect of the fall of the Khomeiniist regime in Iran, both as a factor in terrorism and in the context of mosque and state? Yes, Hassan, you want to talk?
I did the second one. Yeah, just the first one.
Okay, the argument that the Prophet was, a terrorist or something like that is unacceptable. It's well established that the Prophet made it clear not for everybody not to target innocent civilians. They were killing people at wars, and they were being killed as well at wars. But there was a doctrine in Islam, very clearly stated by the Prophet, that prohibits targeting innocent civilians. There's no question about that. And at the same time, respecting the people who are conquered. This is, Islam did not spread so fast because it was a murderous regime. Sure, it was a powerful, they were building an empire. As I said, in wars are ugly. People were being killed. But we have to distinguish here between terrorism that is targeting innocent civilians and legitimate warfare where fighters are attacking other fighters, basically military people fighting military people.
Thank you. Let me add one more sentence to it.
Louder.
Pardon? Oh. Let me add one more sentence to it. What is the use of bringing this type of approach to Islam today? Whatever have happened in last 1400 years, the whole history is so messy. There's not a single element which is not debatable. By using those, you try to corner 1.3 billion Muslims who are important member of human family. If they suffer, the whole family suffers. Rather, Islamic scholars are able to extract good philosophies, peaceful philosophies as Islam. Let us try that way. That will really serve our purpose. Now, about if, and really if, the Khomeini government fails, what will be the impact? Remember, Islam today, as we see, are the gift of all the imams who are mostly from Iran. What happens in Iran has tremendous impact of Muslim world directly and indirectly on the humankind. The moment actually it will fail because Sharia doesn't have the capacity to run a country in compliance to modern understanding of human rights. It got free hand in Pakistan. It got free hand in other places. Everywhere it failed because it is not able to. The moment it will fail, the belief that a state based on Allah's law can answer every question and can solve every problem will be gone. The whole Muslim world will be awakened with a reality that Sharia-based Islamic states cannot work. That will be a good thing. Now, about these philosophies, I don't know if you followed the last week's, on the 27th February, the Brussels Declaration. In Brussels, there is a declaration of European Union in line of this failure of Sharia very indirectly. I will encourage you to see that too, please.
Let me do two quickies on those two. One with regard, what I consider is looking at history with 21st century prism. If this is an intellectual debate, and we want to discuss the Prophet, how it was then that's an intellectual debate. It will remain an intellectual debate. Historians will talk about it. It could be also falling under comparative, because Christian empires have also been part of historical accounts, and other empires, and pre-monotheist empires, and so on and so forth. I would suggest that in our discussions as intellectuals, we would begin with the modern era, meaning the Ottoman Empire collapsed, all previous other Christian and other empires have collapsed, and we have a League of Nations and United Nations. So the debate about terrorism and being engaged or not should be under this set of international law, because the Fatah, the Muslim conquest, the Crusades, and all these massive moves at the time were international relations at the time. So we cannot come in the 21st century and say, well, Khalid ibn al-Walid, attacked in Yarmouk, we're going to take him to the Security Council. It doesn't. I would like to do that. My ancestors would like to do that. But that is an intellectual debate. Let's keep ourselves in the framework. With regard to Iran, I'm going to be very quick here in geopolitics, not theology. The Iranian regime falls. Muqtada al-Sadr fall. Hezbollah fall. And al-Assad falls. And what you're going to have... Yeah? Huh. And as we say, wassalamu alaikum, then the rest will be the Salafis that we're going to be dealing with internationally. Thank you.
Okay, anyway, couldn't hurt. All right, so next.
Thank you, Mr. Lidin.
That's what he likes.
Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lidin and audience. My name is Ali Salehi. I'm from Iran. I'm like Mr. Daryush. Not only me and him, I can say 70 million Iranian that are hostage in Iran by the Islamic regime. My question is from Mr. Nitin. Yeah, I'm so sorry I didn't pronounce your name well. But I believe we have a 52 Muslim country in the world. And you mentioned only one country. Can you mention the other names?
Are you asking me or the...
Okay, wait, well, let's get the second question, since we're doing two at a time.
Unrelated. My name is Gary Ashetel. I'm American and Israeli. I have a question in particular to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
We're talking about mosque and state. It's useful to remind ourselves from time to time that we're talking about mosque and state, which is big enough to tax the greatest minds without having to wander into Israel-Palestine, which also was big enough all by itself to tax the greatest mind. So anyway, saying that.
So my question is, it's confusing what pundits say in terms of the election of Hamas. Some say it was a reaction against corruption of Fatah. Others say, in fact, it's an endorsement for a one-state solution. I'm very curious as to your perception of the Arab street. What is the perception of the possibility of solution as a one-state solution?
I'm sorry, I'm going to bar that question. It's so totally irrelevant to what we're about here. So come talk to us privately about it, and we'll be happy to discuss it. So next, what? It's more than a good question. It's a good question and an important question, but not here, not now. That is not what we are about. I mean, there. It was in the context of Sunni and Shia, which strikes me as legitimate. Anyway, if you guys want to answer it quickly, by all means, go. But I think it's out of line.
Well, you know, I'm not quite sure if I understood the question. Why did I mention one Muslim state and not the 52? I mentioned quite a few, and you know, I also mentioned that there are some of them that are the democracies today, and some of them are some of the best, some of the worst dictators that exist in the world today. So we cannot just, you know, like, you know, sort of generalize in that term. But I think we could make the question of the Palestine-Israel question relevant in the sense that this is, okay, the rise of political Islam to government. And as my colleague mentioned earlier, wherever Islamic Sharia ruled, it failed. It failed in Pakistan, it failed in Sudan, and I could also say that in Palestine. You know, I always argued there is no Islamic way to collect the garbage. You have to have people to collect the garbage, whether you're an Islamist or you believe in Sharia or you don't believe in Sharia. This whole concept of Islamic Sharia that it will save the day, it didn't save the day. The Palestinians were demonstrating in the streets to bring down the Hamas government. Not because they don't subscribe to their political, you know, abstract political views, which are suicidal political views, as some people would say, but because they failed to deliver to the people. So the mullahs in Iran have failed their people. The Islamists, whenever they gain power, they end up, you know, I remember the Muslim Brotherhood. King Hussein brought a few ministers from the Muslim Brotherhood in the cabinet. And one of the ministers, you know, faced with the challenge of dealing with the unemployment problem, he suggested that stop women from working. And that's a way to solve the unemployment problem, which is absolutely. And, you know, people were so angry with the Muslim Brotherhood that even the followers of the Muslim Brotherhood put pressure on the ministers to resign because they exposed their bankruptcy in dealing with real life challenges. So Hamas failed because it could not deliver. It had to, you know, first it promised the people that it doesn't need foreign aid. And once it found out that it wasn't getting any foreign aid except from the Iranians, and the Iranians were not going to compensate for everybody, they failed. You know, this whole concept that, you know, people will be willing to tolerate, you know, hardship. People want to live. They want a government to promise them life, not a movement that, you know, promises them mass suicide.
Next.
Okay. I'm Zaino Baran, based in Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., and originally from Turkey. And we've talked about the caliphate a lot. And the Ottoman Empire, of course, was head of the caliphate for several centuries. And one of the things that was established at the end of it was separation of mosque and state. And at the time, the ulama agreed with it as well. And then we've had, of course, the creation of the modern Turkish Republic over 80 years ago, and it's been established as a secular democracy. I won't now give a speech about Turkey, but I wish there was a little bit more time to talk about this, because it is relevant given that the jihadis and the Al-Qaeda and others would like to revert Turkey back to the caliphate, and conquering Turkey would be a huge, basically domino effect. Now, with that sort of introduction, I have a question, I guess, mostly to Mr. Salem Nemat, I was very impressed with your historic sort of, the way you brought it to today. And I have two concerns based on where I see we're headed. One is, like during the time in the communism, now I see the U.S. and Europeans and many others, and possibly Canada, I'm not sure, saying basically now we have the problem with jihadism, which some people say is violent extremism. And so we need to, support some other people, fund some other people who can take them on, and that is the fact of the Muslim Brotherhood now. And it's been very difficult to explain to our government in Washington that Muslim Brotherhood and other sort of non-violent Islamists are not the friends, and they cannot be friends. I'm wondering where you see that leading, because I think what you were saying is that now that some of these groups may even give up violence, it's probably just a tactical and not strategic. And the second related question is also, we talked about the Shiites were the bad guys, the Shiites were the good guys, and now the Sunnis are the bad guys. But I think we're now back to Shiites being the bad guys because of Iran. And I think now we're seeing the Saudis and some of the Gulf countries being again allowed to fund a lot of these Sunni movements to be able to take on potential, rise of the Shiite belt. Now, the two of them combined, I see over the next, 10, 20, 30 years, even more troubles ahead than we're even in today. Thank you.
Sir.
Hi, my name's Doug Kruschke. I'm from Los Angeles. I'm a citizen here and I represent an emerging group of people, primarily in Southern California, who are looking at what is it we can do to help what's being pointed at here. I have my own interest in my work with organizations and communities is how you get things done. And I had 4 questions that I'd love for you to answer that really I think would be helpful for people who want to do something. And given what's been talked about both in this session and before, one of the things that seems to be incredibly powerful is the vision that's portrayed by the jihadists about what it is that if you join that movement, you will get. Most simply, you will get to contribute to to the bringing of God's caliphate onto this world, and if you give your life for that, you will get ultimate rewards in heaven. That's an incredibly compelling vision. And so the first question is, what is the vision that's being articulated at all? And where would I find it? Where could we find it that would be able to compete with that vision that says, give that up and come on over here to join us? That's the first thing. Because that, to me, if we can't answer that question, we're in big trouble. The second thing is, given that we can articulate that vision, how do we get it out there? People have talked about education, but I think we've said, my gosh, the machine that's been generated here with money from various sources is huge, the madrasas. So the second thing is, how would we articulate it? How would we distribute it? The third is, who are the authorities, the people of influence in the world? I know that you all here have some of that influence, but who are the folks who would endorse that vision, that distribution? And first and finally, where are we in that process? What's the map that we can follow? How is all that happening? What would we be able to do that would, those of us who might be able to do something, whether it be money or time, to contribute to that vision, that distribution, tipping and going in a different direction? Thank you.
Great. So the 2 questions are, one, talk about Turkey a bit, because that is separation of mosque and state, and maybe that's a good model. And second is, we need to post the address where to send checks for. Right.
That wasn't second.
Right. Benafsha is ready.
Benafsha, okay. You want to go on Turkey? Muslim Brotherhood, sorry, Muslim Brotherhood.
That's a very good question, from the lady with the Hudson Institute. This is the point I was trying to make, which is, you cannot address this issue from a religious perspective, because, once, as I said, the Iranians are the bad guys when they took the American diplomats hostages without a true understanding on what was going on and what kind of regime was being shaped there. And, the Americans just adopted this very hostile attitude after that, instead of helping those who did not like what the regime looked like once it took power. And then, 9/11 just shifted things into the Sunnas. Sunnas are the terrorists, the suicide bombers, and so we should be on the Shia side, especially that the Shia cooperated with us, even the Iranians, when America was bringing down Saddam's regime, and the Iranians also supported the bringing down of the Taliban regime because it serves their own interests. In other words, America should not meddle into religious affairs of other countries, should not build a policy based on religious sectarian affiliations. America should do the right thing. America should do the right thing. If you really believe in spreading democracy in the Arab world because it's a matter of national interest for the United States and because it is a way to eliminate terrorism, then you should just go and do it. But you cannot be selective. You cannot say, I want to back democracy in Iran, but I don't want to back it in Jordan. I want to back democracy in Syria, but not in Libya, because the Libyans has started saying the nice things. They abandoned their weapons of mass destruction. Democracy cannot be applied selectively, otherwise it's hypocrisy.
Let me quickly make one comment on this, and then for the 4 points you can read my book, but it's all there, and the book is maybe here. But I'll quickly. Dr. Zaino Baran is a friend and a colleague and a leading expert on Salafism. I wanted to recognize that she's not somebody passing by, and thank you for being here. My colleague mentioned the actual content. I will mention a concern. I think that in Washington and in Brussels, but Brussels, of course, the situation is worse. When I say Brussels, I mean the European Union and all what's surrounding that. But in Washington, although at the level of leadership, president speeches, vice president speeches, I'm not talking politics, just strategy, congressional leaders from both parties who see the light in terms of understanding jihadism, I think that we are really ahead and in different ways of where we were decades ago and when leaders considered that jihad was a spiritual yoga. The problem is that between the top tier and the actual bureaucracy, which is in charge of managing our foreign policy, dealing with the issues on the ground, there is a big problem. The lower part and the middle part of our bureaucracy are still operating with the parameters of pre-9/11. They are still dealing with the Saudis and Assad and Iran and others, not just by the fact that they are influenced by experts who are very much influenced, not to say other things, by these regimes and these powers and are providing the advice. And that advice is basically slowing us in the war on terror, is not allowing us to launch successfully the war of ideas. That's why the normal viewers in the West listen to those brilliant speeches and at the same time see that on the ground we are lost as to who to support and what to do. I mean, it's clear. It would be clear to average Americans, all of us, that we should be supportive of the Iranian opposition not tomorrow, 20 years ago, and yesterday, and today. This should be standing policy. Instead, the Baker Hamilton report is telling us to go to speak to Ahmadinejad. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The public probably now has more consciousness of these issues than many of the analysts who are producing these reports, on the one hand. On the other hand, for the issue of vision and target and world leadership, quickly, the production of a jihadist vision is basically a big machinery. You cannot attack it from one angle. You need a war room in Washington, D.C., in Europe, and elsewhere, and in the Arab moderate world. Let me continue. You need one. Okay. Number two, there are a lot of quarters in government, and at the end of the session, there's somebody from government who may testify to this, who are aware of it, but there is no decision, in my sense, in this administration or in this Congress. And of course, if the opposition in this country would come to power at this point and at this stage, they certainly have, if this project is weak, there is no other project elsewhere. I'm going to be very clear about it. And in Europe, it's even worse. So bad news at that level. The good news is that consciousness is raising in the public, in the mind of the public, people like citizens, but the government is not yet responding. world leaders endorsing, you have all sorts of leaders, MPs in Europe, legislators here in the Arab world, but you don't have a coalition. The coalition that exists for Iraq is not the coalition that should exist against jihadism worldwide. And where are we in the process? I think all what is going to affect is this. We have two pools, the Western public and the Muslim public. There is a war of ideas in the Muslim public, another one here, and both relates to each other. But here we have the freedom to start it, to finance it, and to support it. So I think that NGOs in America and in Europe are the ones who should put pressure on governments, devise a strategy, and reach out to Muslim dissidents and resistance in the Arab and Muslim war. That's the ballistics. Thank you.
Rich, do you want to say something, or are you just
I do, yeah.
holding on to the microphone
waiting,
for stability?
Talking about separating mosque and state, I'm wondering if it makes sense to start in Western Europe and the United States, separating mosque from state. In Europe, we see government-funded mosques, and these are often the most radical ones, especially in Belgium and the Netherlands. The United States, technically, we don't have government funding of mosques, but in reality we do, because these are tax-exempt bodies that can take money from anywhere, and many of them take it from Gulf Arab and Saudi states. So the question I'd like to ask is, would it make sense, would it be effective to have a policy that would say that in exchange for that tax exemption for any house of worship, you may not take money from abroad and must have at least half of your money come from the congregation that regularly attends your services? Would that be helpful in sort of separating mosque and state? And would it lead to a more moderate, more mainstream message in those mosques?
Look, I think the question of radical Wahhabi mosques across America and across Europe is really a huge problem, enormous. And I think that we are, as you implied, we're tied up in knots over this question because it's, among other things, a First Amendment question. So that when the First Amendment says Congress should pass no law interfering with freedom of religion.
But I'm talking about a change in tax policy.
No, I understand what you're talking about, but this is a network of Wahhabi mosques, which is funded by Saudi Arabia, where the reading literature comes from Saudi Arabia, where the class programs come from the Saudis, and which in practice are creating the next generation of terrorists, both here and in Europe, as well as in the Muslim world. I don't see how we can possibly tolerate that. And I think, cutting overseas budgets or changing tax law isn't going to do it.
So you don't think denying money, if you get a U.S. tax exemption as a house of worship, adding two restrictions saying that you cannot receive money from abroad, you can send it abroad, but you can't take it from abroad, and that half of the budget of your house of worship, mosque, church, whatever, must come from the people who attend.
How are you going to enforce that?
Can I take it?
There are records. I mean, in order to.
But that is exactly what the First Amendment.
People who donate currently to houses of worship get a tax exemption on their personal income tax, and there are records kept of who's donated what when. I mean,
only the people who claim the deductions. Believe me, it puts you.
Well, can we put the question to the panel? Would it be helpful at all?
Can I take it? Can I take it?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, it will not hit the root of the problem. You cannot stop money flow because it will flow personally on a person-to-person basis, and it is just impossible to monitor everything. But the point is, your country is not secular in the sense it should have been. When you say "in God we trust," you betray your atheist citizens and agnostic citizens. And a tax exemption of huge buildings is also a betrayal to atheist citizens. That is another concern. But about the madrasas funding, I want to bring your attention to a very important point. Terrorism, we are hearing it all the time. What you are talking about and what you understand it by it is hot terrorism. that is beheading, bombing, bleeding, killing, please notice that there is another system of violence, terrorism, that is cold terrorism. You cannot see it. That is the terrorism by laws, by culture, by systems, and Sharia falls into that. This law victimizes each and every Muslim woman in the world every second. This is very important. If you travel in the Muslim world, you will see the devastating impact of this cold terrorism. This ideology cannot be stopped by blocking fundings. This ideology has to be fought in the ideological front, and that is the weakest front of political Islam.